Alright guys, I'm here, this is Glitching the Code, and I'm here with a gentleman called Mark Devlin. He is a UK-based club and radio DJ, a musical journalist, and he is author of Musical Truth, Volume 1 and 2. These are incredible books. I've looked into the music industry quite in depth, and in the film industry, and I think once you start looking into this work, it leads you all together, and all of these strands come together. Mark's books are the best I've found on the music industry, and bringing all these strands together. So Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for the kind words, Rich, and it makes me tired just hearing all that about what I do. I never actually stop to think about how much there is, but yeah, it's a lot of work. It keeps me busy, but better that than being bored and aimless, right? Well,
it is, and you're doing something that's obviously a passion for you. So how did you come to see the music industry? You've obviously started off as a DJ in the light that you have. Do you remember that first time you thought, hang on a minute, these things aren't quite what they seem?
Well, I think it was a degradation in the music that I played, which I noticed as the 2000s wore on, probably from about 2006, 2007. I noticed that so-called urban music, which I played up to that point, hip-hop and R&B and reggae dance, all these kind of styles, that is the stuff that I made a name for myself as a DJ playing. And for many years, I went out doing gigs and I did radio shows playing all this stuff, and I was very much a part of the scene, mixing and mingling and networking with other DJs and producers and record company folk and artists from those genres. But I noticed that the music was really starting to degrade in terms of its quality round about that time. And this sort of coincided with me getting into some reading and some research pertaining to what was going on in the world generally. And I came to realize that my worldview up to that point was very, very naive and had been very skewed by what I'd absorbed through mainstream media and societal programming that we all get through the so-called education system and the nightly TV news, and what government ministers tell us and what scientists and academic professors tell us and all this. And I slowly and grudgingly came to realize that the world is nothing like we thought it was, and this applies to all aspects of our lives. And to cut a long story short, I realized that entertainment and popular culture, and specifically the music business that I was a part of, was no different, and that manipulation and corruption and aspects of mind control and in training the general public in what to think were very much woven into that whole scene. And so I came to realize that the degradation of the music was no accident. It was no random thing, because people were saying at the time, oh, it's just the way the industry goes. You know, the music scene goes in cycles and things progress. But I didn't see it progressing. I saw it regressing. And hip hop, which was my chosen kind of art form that I really attached myself to, had become so unrecognizable from what it was in the early 90s when I first got into it, that I realized that there were agendas at play. And then I came to understand that the music industry is controlled by secret societies that are steeped in occult ritualistic activity. Many people have a lot of trouble with statements like that in terms of accepting them, but I've done the research, and many other people have as well, and there have been many insiders from these industries that have come forward to confirm just that. And we get more and more evidence of it with every passing week. And I realized that the music scene was being used to push certain social engineering agendas and to change culture, to change societal attitudes, to have mind-controlling effects on people, to affect the subliminal subconscious minds of large numbers of people and implant ideas and perceptions. And this has formed the basis of my work now for the past 8 years plus. It led me to put out the 2 books, Musical Truth Volumes 1 and 2, and I've just immersed myself in this research, because once my interest got piqued by it, I just couldn't turn away from it. You know, you fall down the rabbit hole, to use that analogy, and there's no climbing back out of it again. And also, I'm someone that has never appreciated discovering that I've been lied to and that I've been deceived and cheated. I don't take kindly to discovering that. And when I realize that it's happened, it's very important for me personally to find out how I was duped, what methods and tactics were used, so that I can arm myself to know better for next time. And I encourage other people in this regard as well. I always end my public talks by suggesting to others that they might like to look into the ways in which they themselves have been deceived and make sure that doesn't happen again to them. It's a very painful process for people to come to terms with. No one likes to accept that a music genre or a scene or a movement or a fad or a trend or a favourite personal hero or guru of theirs might not be all that they thought they were, and there might be more to know. But as I say so often, it just comes down to whether you're somebody that wants truth no matter what, no matter how unsettling it may be, or whether you're someone that is happy to live under mind control and know that you are. I don't understand how anyone can be content living that way, but apparently large numbers of people still can, because denial runs deep. So that's a fairly long-winded response to your question.
It's exactly how I got into looking into this stuff as well. And it does lead you down and down into this rabbit hole. One of the terms that I really like from your book is lifetime actors. Now, this really rung a bell with me. There was two things in your book, and I will speak about the one later, but this one, lifetime actors, I thought that really actually makes sense to me now, that these people are brought up to do certain jobs, and I've called it like a ticking time bomb. They're put in certain positions to go off at certain points in their career to do certain things. Can you explain to the listener what you mean by lifetime actor?
Sure. I was just trying to pull up a lyric there from one of my favourite conscious rappers in this regard, Diesel Automatic. He's an awesome MC. Grew up in Chicago. He's now based in Montenegro in the Balkan region of Europe. And I recited this lyric on a radio show the other day, and I unfortunately screwed it up. And I made a mental note to myself to never try and rap on a radio show again. I'm no rapper, but I do just want to recite this lyric because it really sums up everything that we just said. So he's got this track called Here I Stand. And he comes in blasting with his verse saying, I put my music on the web as a method to spread my message. People be like, Diesel, why are you getting so aggressive? I do it because I'm pissed off. Our whole lives we've been lied to, cheated, mistreated, deceived and ripped off. So he's saying there what motivates him to make the conscious music that he does. And that's exactly what motivates me, just going back to what I was saying. Our whole lives we've been lied to, cheated, mistreated, deceived and ripped off. And I don't take kindly to any of that. Yeah. So to get on to lifetime actors, this is a term that was coined by Joseph Atwill, author and researcher. He did Caesar's Messiah, and he's done a whole bunch of other things. He did a load of shows with Jan Irvin on Gnostic Media going back a few months. Those two have since fallen out, and they don't work together anymore, but I'm not going to get into the whole politics of that. But it was Joe Atwill that coined the term lifetime actor, and they did many shows on Gnostic Media actually exposing many of the people that fall into that category. So a lifetime actor is somebody who is presented to us through the media and through popular culture as one thing or the other. So they can be a politician, they can be a consciousness guru, they can be a business leader, think Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, people like that. They could be a prominent musician, they can be a Hollywood actor, a television presenter, a favorite sports star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, somebody like that. And the public is entrained to think of them as just that. Oh, well, Bill Gates is that nerdy computer guy. You know, Mark Zuckerberg's that dorky college kid that invented Facebook. But when you go a little further and you actually delve beyond the mainstream Wikipedia version of events that these people want you to stick with, you discover some very interesting things. And this style of research is available to anyone that wants to get into it. You know, it's been termed citizen research. It's people just basically doing all this work off their own backs. You don't need any kind of academic background. You don't need any kind of training. You don't need any kind of letters after your name. Ordinary people are getting involved in this stuff all the more now. And it's research that anyone can do on the internet because all the information is there in the public domain. So you can start to delve into the backgrounds and the family connections and the affiliations of many of these people. And when you do, you discover many interesting things right there waiting to be found. And it's then a case of joining the dots and seeing what patterns and trends emerge. And you find time and time again that so many of these people are not quite who you thought they were. And their links go much further than what you'll get in their official biographies. So you find connections going into military intelligence all the time. There's connections to the CIA, the FBI, MI5, MI6, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, the these think tank organizations like Stanford Research Institute, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, these academic organizations, Yale and Harvard universities, then you start getting into some of these secret societies that are connected to these institutions, like Skull and Bones at Yale and the Bohemian Club, the Century Club. You find, when you go back far enough, connections into occult organizations like the Church of Satan, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, all of this. Freemasonry comes up very regularly in terms of family links. You find connections into occasionally these think tank organizations like the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations. And none of these things should be present in the biographies and the backgrounds of these people if they are just as we're told they are. Musicians and film stars and stuff like this. I did a talk at an Acapulco in Mexico just a couple of weeks ago, and I used Madonna as an example. So my talk there was titled No More Heroes, and because that conference was aimed at an audience of anarchists who are people that reject any kind of governmental authority over them, they just want to live freely. And they don't want to be bothered. They just want to be left alone. They do no harm. They cause no harm to another, and they just wish to live free, sovereign lives in that way. And my message to them was, I completely appreciate the mindset that you espouse, but there is a way in which you are being controlled and manipulated and coerced that very few people seem to think about, and that is what gets done through celebrities and through popular culture. And I use Madonna as an example. There was a quote from a video that she put out in 1985 of her Virgin, tour. Yeah. And at the beginning of it, she says something along the lines of, I came to New York, I didn't know anyone, I had to work really hard, had to make some connections, do a bit of hustling, I stayed true to my dreams, I kept wanting it every day, and against all the odds, I made it and I was successful. And that's the fairy story that we're entrained to accept with so many of these people. You're supposed to believe that artists such as Madonna and bands such as U2 and Coldplay and the Rolling Stones and The Who just work really hard, cross their fingers for good luck, play a few gigs, do a bit of hustling and networking, meet the right people, get put on, and then earn themselves a record deal and become millionaire superstars that travel the world and become household names. Well, when you continue with this example of Madonna and you look into her background, you discover through her genealogy the bloodlines that she emanates from and the other people that she's connected to via these bloodlines. So professional genealogists have dug into this, and they've published family trees and charts, which are available online, which show that Madonna is linked genealogically one way or another to George Bush, well, both George Bushes, Barack Obama, Dick Cheney. So George Bush himself was actually genealogically linked to his own vice president. And yet
mental, isn't it?
Well, it makes a complete mockery of this illusion of choice when it comes to political votes. And then there's connections going into Celine Dion, who's a cousin of Madonna. I mean, these are cousins several times removed, so it's like 9th cousins or 12th cousins or something like this. But nevertheless, we're talking about the same families that keep cropping up in the public eye generation after generation. Madonna is also linked to Ellen DeGeneres, or Degenerate, whatever she's called, the TV presenter and comedian. And you just got all these insane links going off all over the place. There's connections going into Brad Pitt, who in turn is actually related to Angelina Jolie. So
that makes
it just
a lot
becomes...
of sense.
Yeah, it just becomes ridiculous. And you realise that these people are placed in the public eye rather than having worked really hard against all the odds, and they're just the lucky ones that broke through. You realise that the entire game is rigged. And we're not told this. You'll get articles in the newspaper that say, well, genealogists have discovered this amazing link between Madonna and Celine Dion. Who knew? But they never join the dots fully and bring it to its logical conclusion, which is to say, well, hang on a minute, it looks as if all these celebrities are becoming famous because of who they are and what families they come from. It's never linked that way. And in the UK, you're probably familiar with this show they have on BBC One called Who Do You Think You Are?
Yeah.
And this is where they take a celebrity and they get genealogists to dig into their past and historians to look into where their families came from. One example recently was Danny Dyer, who's portrayed as this good old Cockney geezer, EastEnders and all this. And it turns out that he's actually descended from British royalty, going back several generations, one of the English kings, and he's descended from this statesman, politician, Thomas Cromwell. I mean, what are the chances of that happening just randomly?
Yeah.
Versus these people deliberately being given these roles. And so, of course, this is the main crux of what I'm putting forward when I talk about lifetime actors and culture creation. It's all served up to us, and we're being mugged off by being asked to believe that it's all random and haphazard and it could have been anyone.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And there's people like you spoke about Ed Sheeran, and I come from Norwich, so I know Ed Sheeran's past quite well, and how it was made into he was homeless and it was ridiculous. He slept on his mate's couch a couple of times when he was hungover. And his dad, as you've pointed out in your talks, is a curator for was it the 50th birthday of Prince of Wales? The Prince of Wales.
Yeah, he's connected to the royal family and the United Nations. Exactly.
So this guy isn't picked out of thin air, and it makes a mockery of all of these people going on these X Factor programs, these voice programs. It is quite clearly a puppet show anyway, and it's quite clearly just a panto. But that even to that level, I don't think people realise that this really is not going anywhere. I speak to Steve Brookstein quite a lot, who won the original X Factor. Quite good friends with him, and he talks about the background of it. And he's a fascinating man to speak to about this sort of thing. I've just done a film where I spoke to Ronan Parks, who came, I think, second or third in one of the Britain's Got Talent, and he talks about the background of this as well. And this thing has been given to us not just in the music industry, but in the film industry, in working for someone in a self-development field. You can be the next Tony Robbins. You can't be that. That is something that kids are being set up to fail. They're trying to get somewhere that the door is just not open for them. That's heartbreaking.
Well, yeah, and like I said, young people are being coerced into believing that all you've got to do is work really hard and keep honing that talent and get yourself on one of these shows in front of a judging panel, and you too could be the next superstar. And it just doesn't work like that. There's been all kinds of stories about talent shows like Britain's Got Talent and X Factor and all these being rigged. They know who they want to win. The whole thing is just an entertainment vehicle designed to draw in viewers each week. And it's pretty tragic because these industries, whether it's the film industry or television or supermodels even, or professional sports on top of the music industry, are very seductive and attractive to young people. It's a bit more sexy than pushing the trolleys in the car park at Tesco or working behind the counter at McDonald's, So it's understandable why young people would want to emulate their heroes and their stars and try and be like them. But it really is a trap, and these industries are not somewhere you want to be, at least in the upper echelons of it. So a lot of people have written to me over the months, and they've said, oh, well, I'm in a band, or I'm a producer, or I'm a vocalist, and I really want to express my art because I feel I've got some talent and I want to put some messages out there and make some good music, but I'm very wary of being caught up in the industry machine. And so the only advice I can give is that you should absolutely pursue your goals and express your art and your skills as best you can, but just be very wary of reaching certain levels in the industry. So I've never worked within the industry machine in that way. I've always been on the periphery of it as a DJ. So I've never been employed by any record company or any other corporation, just a couple of radio stations. So I don't know exactly what the process is, but people have come forward that have been a part of the industry, insiders, whistleblowers, and they've told me, there reaches a point where you've exhibited a certain amount of skill and talent, and it's been noticed. And these spotters for the industry will then approach you at a certain point and make you that golden offer. And invite you to be elevated up the next few rungs of the ladder. And that's the point where you have to start to be wary. So you're allowed to kind of grind and graft away and express yourself pretty much on your own terms until you reach a certain level. And then you're invited to step into the frame and, start attending these eyes wide shut style parties. And that's the point where people really need to just say no and pull back. And it will be difficult because they'll be turning their backs on what appear to be some amazing things that are being offered to them, £1 million or $1 million contracts and the promise of yachts and mansions and jet set lifestyles. But it's everything that comes with it that you don't get told. The ways in which you have to degrade yourself and humiliate yourself with some of the things that you're going to be asked to do. And again, this might sound fantastic and outrageous to people, but from what I've been told, it's very, very real. And if you go on YouTube and look at some of these videos that other researchers have put out and that people in the industry have come forward and talked about, you realize that these sick satanic rituals and these dark occult witchcraft events are very real. And some of your very favorite names, the identities of which would shock many people, will have been involved in these things as a condition of their fame. Just by way of one solitary example, I don't know if you recall a story that emerged probably a year or two ago involving John Travolta. And I forget the exact details because I'm doing this off the top of my head. Okay. But he got into some sort of altercation with, I think it was a hotel worker. And he started moaning and screaming at him. And this guy was saying something about, oh, you're a superstar, I'm just a regular working class guy and you're abusing me. And John Travolta said something along the lines of, I'd have to check out the exact detail, but he said, if you knew what I had to do to become as famous as I am, to achieve this status, you'd want to stay in that job and you would not want to be where I am now. And I think he gave some further detail about it as well, but because I don't have the quote in front of me, I won't go into the specific detail. But, there's one example of somebody breaking down the fact that that kind of fame and fortune and success comes with a very heavy price to pay that most people would just not want to have to do.
Yeah, it does. And there's a bit of research that I've looked up into the origins of the term Hollywood, which is from Rome, and there's a place in Rome called Hollywood. And just to briefly sort of explain that it's built around, it looks like the Hollywood Hills, so they've done a complete restructure in Hollywood. And it's based around a place called Diana's Mirror. And what it used to be was they used to get all the rich kings, knights or whatever to go in there on their boats to be promised to be made stars. So I'd assume they'd go in there and have some sort of ritual to live forever. But when they got in there, they were raped and pillaged and everything was stolen from them. And it's what they're doing in Hollywood now is the same alluring thing. They'll bring you in with your talents, but once you're in, you're locked in. And that's an old ritual. Hollywood, the word holly comes from the holly tree, satanic tree. The holly, I think it was the wands were made of. So there's a lot of deep ritualistic things that go into this along the years, which I'm sure you know yourself and during your research. I don't think people realise how literal that they take these things, these people. Gina Jolie's on YouTube talking about sacrificing a snake. I mean, I think it's so fantastical that people really don't believe it, don't want to believe it as well.
That's right. I didn't know all of that about the origins of Hollywood that you just mentioned. I've heard it said that the name derives from the holy wood, which is a kind of wand that magicians, druids used to use in ancient times to perform magic, ceremonial magic, and it took its name from that. I mean, the thing about these celebrities being into all these dark occult ritualistic practices is that they're relying on the general public exhibiting exactly that kind of reaction to it. Oh, that's too much. That can't be true. That just sounds ridiculous. I can't accept that at all. For as long as the general public comes out with reactions like that, guess what? It continues. So it doesn't really matter that any one individual might reject all this and think it's ridiculous and just not accept it at all. They do. These people that we're talking about and their controllers, their handlers, those that run these industries, they do take all this stuff very seriously. They're into these religious practices. Like I said at the start, it is occult practitioners that are running all these industries, going up into these secret society networks. That's the control web that feeds down into all these other aspects of society. So it's very, very real, regrettably. And then you get stories like the one that we've had recently with R. Kelly. So there's been rumours about R. Kelly for years. I remember back in the 90s when I used to play a lot of his music because I loved the R&B stuff that he put out in the 90s. But I remember there was this unsavoury story about how he'd married Aaliyah, the other R&B singer who's now deceased in suspicious circumstances, when she was 15. And then that marriage had to be very quickly annulled and, made void because it was illegal. And that was a bit troubling, a grown man wanting to marry a 15-year-old girl. And then there were all these stories of sex tapes that he'd allegedly made with these underage girls, and he was pissing on them and all this horrible stuff. And then more recently, we've had all these full-blown accusations about R. Kelly running some kind of mind control cult commune, where he kept all these women as like concubines, and he would just help himself to sexual favors from them, and he would kind of have this mind controlling effect over them where he cut them off from their families, and he'd teach them to revere him as some sort of father figure to them, and all this weird and strange stuff. And this has all come out through this several part documentary, Surviving R. Kelly. Mm-hmm. And now finally that guy's name is mud. So we had all these rumors for many years, but his record still got played. R&B DJs would always finish the night with Ignition Remix as the lights came up, but I don't think you'll be hearing that in the clubs too much anymore, because it's just too much now. There's been too much about R. Kelly that's come through, about his sordid sexual antics. And it wouldn't surprise me if this would be the case with the vast majority of artists on his level. It's just that every now and again, one of them either gets a little indiscreet and becomes a bit of a loose cannon and takes this whole agenda a bit too far on their own personal whim. Or it's the case that every now and again, for whatever reason, the industry likes to throw one of these people to the dogs, and they let the press get hold of them, and they let them get hung out to dry, and all these sordid details emerge. But it wouldn't surprise me if most, if not all, artists on that level have deep, dark secrets of this nature. I can only speculate on why it is that the likes of R. Kelly get exposed. We've got all this stuff about Michael Jackson now as well. And on the day that we're recording this very evening, Channel 4 is set to screen the first part of this documentary, Leaving Neverland, which is where you've got two more grown males who are accusing Michael Jackson of having sexually molested them when they were kids, which sits alongside the other allegations against Michael Jackson, which we already know about. So it's not looking good 10 years after his apparent death, all this stuff coming out. Mm. But I think all this stuff is business as usual in the sick, diseased machine that is the corporate music industry. It's just another day at the office.
I would agree with you there. Regardless of whether we think Michael Jackson and R. Kelly are guilty or not guilty of this stuff that goes on in the industry, and you have to look at the timing when this stuff comes out. I think we just said in an email previously that tomorrow is Harvey Weinstein's court appearance. Now, that hasn't been brought up in the mainstream media at all, and if you look at the connections between Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jackson, Dave Geffen and Harvey Weinstein, this seems to be a bit of a distraction from Weinstein's court case coming on here. Now, it's not to say that anyone in this thing hasn't got mud on their hands. What is to say is that these things are timed very well. And this is the way the industry works. If you feel like you're going to get in the industry and no, you'll be okay, these are my mates, they will throw you under the bus as soon as it's your turn to take that. These people are psychotic and psychopathic. That's the industry that you're getting involved with, whether that's the film industry or the music industry or any media industry. There's reasons why myself and Mark do this sort of work and have to have side jobs, because you can't talk about these things and earn a good living in the media industry. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, there's very little money in truth, mate, as we come to discover. And you have to keep those day jobs going sometimes, unfortunately. It brings to mind another story, everything that you just said there, which is very current. I think it arrived in my inbox just this morning. The NME have run a story this week about Kanye West, who's been a very deeply troubled soul for many years now. And unfortunately, I just don't think the whole story is going to end well for Kanye West because of how deeply embroiled he is in this industry. But this story is talking about the details of his recording contract with EMI as the holding company for all these smaller sort of subsidiary record labels and production companies. And the details of this contract stipulate that Kanye West can never retire.
Right.
You can get into the wording of it, but it's basically saying we own your ass for life, reading between the lines. You know, it's all there in legal terminology, but it's saying basically you will continue to serve this corporation, you will continue to come up with creative output, you will continue to supply us with albums and productions for the rest of your days. So that's a pretty grim contract to be locked into. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if this is the nature of the contracts that many of these artists are locked into. You know, I've often mused over why it is that the likes of Paul McCartney, in inverted commas, we won't get into the replacement thing today. That's something for another show. But, you know, if we accept for a moment that that is actually Paul McCartney, there he is still touring and still performing at 76 years of age, 77 in June. Why would you want to still be doing that? I know people say, oh, he loves it. It's his life. It keeps him active and energetic. He gets a buzz off of doing the tours and making the albums and stuff. But really, you know, that guy could have retired 25, 30 years ago and not had a single financial worry. Do you really still want to be slogging it out and going through all these different time zones and having all these tiring late nights and life on the road at 77 years of age? And then you think of the likes of the Rolling Stones, you know, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards still out there, still doing their thing. Cliff Richard, not quite so much these days. He's had a couple of issues, you know.
Couple of issues, yeah. We could do another whole show and a documentary on Cliff Richard. That's to come.
Couple of issues, yeah. But, you know, Tom Jones and Bob Dylan, and there's so many artists that you can cite that are still touring in their 70s. And it wouldn't surprise me if they've got a similar kind of contract to Kanye, which stipulates that you will continue to serve this industry machine for the rest of your days. For as long as you do, you'll be looked after. You can earn, you know, a great living and have a fantastic, lavish lifestyle, and, you know, all will be good. But you just have to do what's asked of you and toe the line and don't become a loose cannon. Don't make inappropriate statements on chat shows and things like this. And if you're prepared to do that, you can live to a ripe old age and, you know, enjoy all these financial trappings. But unfortunately, your soul, in a very literal sense, is no longer your own because you're not living freely. Going back to what I mentioned earlier about how all these people at Anarchapulco are individuals who recognize their personal sovereignty in creation. We're born free and we have a right to live free of any kind of coercion or any kind of violation into our lives so long as we cause no harm. But that's not the way these rock stars and all these celebrities are living. They're not living freely. They're not living on their own terms. They're living according to what somebody else is stipulating. That's no kind of freedom. That's no way to live. And no amount of yachts and mansions can ever make that worthwhile, in my view.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's an incredibly important thing for people for young kids to hear. And even Bob Dylan, didn't he say famously in an interview that he's still paying the man? He made a deal with the devil and he's still holding up his end. That's right?
Yeah, he did this famous interview with Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes many years ago now. But, you know, the host was asking him what the secret is to his longevity. And he said, I made a deal a long time ago and I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. And the host says, may I ask who you made the deal with? And he hesitates for a bit and stutters. And then he says, you know, the chief commander. And then the host says, the chief commander of this world? And Dylan says, of this world and the world we can't see. That's a famous interview snippet, but it tells you so much.
It tells you so much, and I really feel for these. I used to be a youth worker, and I saw a lot of young people and I wanted to be in the music industry when I was younger as well. I didn't have the talent, unfortunately, fortunately, actually, come to think of it. But
your best gift.
Best gift, yeah. But it's heartbreaking to see these people so desperate. And I'm just about to start work on another documentary which is about social media and the addiction. It's called Dying to Be Seen, and the addiction to be seen. And that plays into it. I did a documentary with Brian Harvey, who used to be in E17, and that came, and it was funny when we were doing it because it wasn't supposed to be about what he wanted it eventually to be about, but he actually called it Invisible. And it all comes back to he can't go back to having a normal life and working a normal 9-to-5 job, or even a job that's in the music industry. He has to be a pop star still, and it's ruined his psychology. And that's really hard to see. And working with him, it was an eye opener, and all the other stuff that came with it.
Well, yeah, I can certainly see how that would be the case. I mean, in my own situation, I've never been anywhere close to being any kind of superstar DJ or any kind of celebrity, and I never wanted to be. I'm very grateful for that. But there was a time where I was reasonably well known in my scene and, quite recognizable. And I've had to make a lot of changes since those days. I play virtually no gigs now. I just do the odd gig here and there for promoters that I already know or for DJ mates or whatever. Little festival appearances and things like this, but I'm not out there on the club circuit like I used to be, and I'm not meeting artists and hobnobbing with industry types and stuff, and I'm quite grateful for that because that's just not where I'm at in my life anymore. That used to be important to me, but it's not anymore. But I tell you what, even though I have to go out there in the car and do private hire driving to pay the bills, I feel free. I feel as if I'm living freely. And I'm beholden to no one, to no corporation. Nobody tells me what to do. I've been self-employed for the past 20 years, and it's just a beautiful feeling just to be able to make your own decisions and not to have to hold up your end of any kind of bargain or deal, in the words of Bob Dylan. And it's just a beautiful thing. So I can understand how somebody like Brian Harvey, even though he's basically broken free of the industry, from what I can make out, it's tainted him, and he's not going to be able to live a completely normal life, like you were saying, because of all the stuff that he has been involved with. I mean, you all know his situation better than me. I have followed some of his videos, and he seems to have spent a lot of time talking about his phone hacking problems with the news of the world. And although that's wrong and obviously should never have happened, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of a personal situation between him and those other parties involved. What I'm far more interested in hearing about is what he knows about stuff that goes on in the music industry and certain individuals and things that they've been involved with. And he seems to be quite hesitant and reticent to come out with details of that. In many ways, it's understandable why he would be so hesitant. But I think what people really want to know when it comes to Brian Harvey is not the details of how his phone was hacked, but what he knows and what he's seen.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out the lines between his manager Tom Watkins, Childline, Esther Ranson, Jimmy Savile. You can put the dots together. It's not hard to find, not hard to figure out what's going on there. Really, really isn't. There's other things like Tony Mortimer was there at one of the Craze funerals. I mean, these aren't hard things and to put together if you do the tiniest bit of research. This is my other question to you as well, and I appreciate your time. Is that, do you find it hard to communicate with people knowing what you know and knowing that they can't see the world this way? And do you find it frustrating? I find it frustrating, as if to say, how can you not know these things? And sometimes I forget that actually people don't know any of this at all.
It's very easy to forget that not everyone sees things the way you do and not everyone has done the research that you do. Absolutely. And I'm reminded of that many times, particularly when I get into conversations with older people. So it can be, guys in their 50s or 60s, and maybe they were fans of the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or the Who or the Grateful Dead or the Doors back in the 60s, and I might say something like, oh, well, it's a shame the Doors were so connected into military intelligence. And one of these old guys will say, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And you go into the background of Jim Morrison, or you could talk about the connections between the Grateful Dead and the CIA. And, these old guys are hearing this for the first time. And, of course, the instant reaction is to reject it and say, you're talking bollocks, mate. I was there in the 60s. You weren't even born. What do you think you know? Yeah. Well, I've just researched it. That's all. The same way that you could if the will was there to do so. But people just don't want to hear it. It goes back to everyone having personal heroes. And I've been just as guilty of that as anyone. I used to have personal DJ heroes. With me, it was, other successful high-profile DJs that I looked up to and would hang on their every word. But I've had to let all those go because I've discovered that they're all tainted and they're all corrupted and they're not who I thought they were. So it's difficult for everyone to let go of these personal heroes. We all have nostalgic investment one way or another in certain individuals. But again, you either want it or you don't. One thing I do find about doing the work that I do, the nature of it is a good way to hook people into truth and freedom and conspiracy issues generally, right, because it's a good conversation starter. When I'm talking to a young person who might be into Beyonce or Rihanna or Lil Wayne or, God forbid, Ed Sheeran, it's a good way of engaging these people in a conversation. If you can say something to someone in their 20s, let's say they love Beyonce and they're fans of Jay-Z and Kanye West, and you can say, well, there's a lot you don't know about these artists. Who is going to walk away from a conversation like that and say, is there? Oh, right, okay, see ya. The only reaction you're ever going to get is, well, what? What is it? Well, tell me more. Yeah. So then you can get that conversation going and you can say, well, there's a few videos you need to look at and have a look at this article about Jay-Z. And those people are going to go straight home and check all that stuff out to make sure you're not bullshitting. And once they do, you've started a process there. Now they're starting to look at that artist in a slightly different light. They're not going to fully accept everything there is to know about them straight away, but you've sowed a seed. And then you can do that with older people as well. Assuming they're willing to go there. So you can say, stuff to know about the Beatles, and David Bowie was into some occult stuff, and again, people are going to be like, well, what do you mean? Tell me more. So once you can, if somebody is prepared to go where the information takes them, then you can move them forward from just the music industry into other areas of life. If you're able to have another conversation with them, you say, well, it's not just the music industry where all this stuff goes on. How do you think it's allowed to flourish and continue in the music industry? The only way it can is because you have secret societies and you have occultists and you have all these different groups controlling things. And this goes into politics and it goes into big business and it goes into the medical industry. It goes into academia. It goes into the military. And then suddenly you've got people looking at all these different areas and you stand the chance of altering their entire paradigm, their entire worldview. Again, if they're prepared to go there. Many people won't be, but it's a great way of setting somebody off on that process if they're of the mind and the will to go where the information takes them.
I mean, it's fantastic, and this is what I've been doing for about 5 or 6 years now, and the stuff that I've learned throughout this time has been amazing. I just wanted to ask you, do you think that they're overplaying this whole Illuminati thing? I remember my nephew's 7 and he talks about the Illuminati and it makes me laugh. It's almost like they've kind of branded it. So all of these symbols actually do mean something. They've kind of made them into a joke, so taken the seriousness out of them. That seems to be quite a sort of something that they've used quite well, especially in music videos.
It's the approved version of everything, isn't it? So they want you to look over here so that you're not looking over there where other things are going on. We made a reference to this earlier, how items are placed into the media to get everybody tittle-tattling and gossiping around the water cooler about a particular thing, so they're not looking somewhere else. So I think there's been a certain amount of damage limitation being done when it comes to the Illuminati, in inverted commas. And I see that term as being a sort of catch-all phrase that encompasses these various different mystery schools and occult groups and think tank organizations and all this. I doubt that there's a singular organization that refers to itself as the Illuminati in existence today, but it's come to be taken as the umbrella term that incorporates all these other different groups. And a few years ago, we had this ridiculous record by Madonna, which was actually called Illuminati. And it was this, pop song where in the lyrics, she's trying to tell people what the Illuminati is.
Yeah, I remember.
And she says, it's not, sacrificing goats around a fire at midnight or something, I exaggerate. But she's saying, it's all about the upliftment of humanity and doing good deeds, and there's nothing sinister about it. This is the basic tone of the lyrics. So, young kids that are into Madonna, are kids still into Madonna?
I don't think so.
Probably not. No. Slightly irrelevant these days.
I don't think no one's told her yet, but I don't think they are. No.
Exactly. Nobody wants to see your gran in a leotard,
I
Madonna.
Definitely don't, no.
Let the leotards go. You're in your 60s. Grow old gracefully, please.
She doesn't know what's going on. She can only remember, the last thing she remembers is, I think, the Frozen album. After that, it's all blank.
Yeah, she looked good in the 80s, but it ain't the 80s anymore.
No.
So, anyone listening to that record would think, oh, well, that's what the Illuminati is about then, because Madonna's just told us. And then you have all these signs and symbols that appear in videos, and I'm sure a lot of it is overdone. They're just placed in there blatantly to get people talking and to get kids thinking they're hip and wise to what all these symbols are. The real reason why they place all these symbols, in my view, which has come through many times in my work, is that it's all adhering to this tenet of placing the truth in plain sight, revelation of the method, which is a very important concept to these occult groups that we're talking about, particularly Freemasonry, but many others as well. It's kind of written into their doctrines that they have to give the public, we profane ones, the opportunity to know what they're all about and understand what's going on. So they do it in symbolic form. They do it in cryptic, encoded ways. They place the truth of these things into movies and music videos and record sleeves and promotional photos and things like this, in the knowledge that the vast majority of people seeing that stuff are not going to understand what it means. For a start, most of it is subliminal. It's subliminal images that don't get fully processed by the conscious mind. They just reside in the subconscious mind. But nevertheless, as they see it, they've given us an opportunity to understand. They've communicated their intent and their will and the truth of what they're all about. And if we're too ignorant and profane to recognize it, well then, too bad. The onus is on us now, and the karmic burden is off of them. That's the way they see it. It might sound ridiculous to people again, but it's a very real thing. And you will find different expressions of this going back through history in many different traditions, in many different mystery school teachings and such. It's something that's very important to them. So they've had to find a way of kind of deflecting true attention to what's going on with all these signs and symbols. And again, it's a case of getting people to look over here and think, oh, it's just these 666 signs and these Baphomet signs and stuff. It's just these artists trying to be controversial and making out they're satanic and all of this, to detract from the real reason why it's being done. See, they don't really want large numbers of us working out what all these signs and symbols and all these different clues mean. They're only doing it because they feel duty bound within creation to communicate this stuff to us, because I really do believe that they think they're getting themselves off of any kind of karmic payback by placing this emphasis on us. But it's not in their interests for large numbers of people to wake up and understand this stuff and start communicating it. They only want a small group to ever be able to see it at any given time. So that's why they're getting everybody to look over here. Well, the real dark stuff is going on over there. You know, this is a favoured tactic that we see being played out time and time again. And you made a reference there to all this Harvey Weinstein shit that's going on. And, you know, the very same week we get this Michael Jackson documentary and everyone's talking about what he may or may not have been up to. And, the Kanye West story and the R. Kelly stuff continues. And there's the story about Keith Flint from The Prodigy this week that's keeping British people talking about all that. So, yeah, it's a very favoured tactic. They've been doing it forever.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big things, and the missing pieces in the puzzle of my research was, why are they showing people? And then I read your books, and that was one of the things that really fit in. Was like, I have to, for karmic law, to say, look, we told you, and you didn't want to take any notice. That really struck home with me, and that made so much sense. So that is something that I really took from your work. So thank you for your time. It's been excellent. I know you're a busy man, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. Where can people find your work, your books, and your website?
Okay, cheers. Well, both volumes of the book, Musical Truth, Volumes 1 and 2, are on Amazon. You can find it there. It's also on Barnes & Noble. You can just search for Mark Devlin Musical Truth. If anyone wants to get a copy of either book from me direct, I send out signed copies, and we can cut Amazon out of the picture, which makes for a better deal for me, and those nasty tax-avoiding scamsters at Amazon don't get to make quite so much profit. Yeah. Which is no bad thing, right? So you can drop me an email to markdevlinuk@gmail.com, and we can arrange that. Yeah. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/markdevlintv. And on there, I've got a whole load of my conference talks uploaded. I've got a load of my radio interviews that I've done, and I've also got my Good Vibrations podcast series, which is conversation-based, like this one. That's where I interview various other people on different subjects. That is also available on my Spreaker page. So if you go to Spreaker.com and search for Mark Devlin there, you'll find my Good Vibration podcast and The Sound of Freedom. And this one is conscious music, message music by real artists. Fantastic. Putting themselves across in their own way, making artistic statements. They're not shackled by corporate agendas. They're not beholden to any record companies or overlords or handlers. This is real music. This is stuff that should be on the radio 24 hours a day. But of course it's not. So you have to dig very deep to find this stuff. And that's what I do when I assemble these shows. And they're all in one place. I'm up to, I think it's 87 shows now. And they're all archived on my Spreaker. So it's called The Sound of Freedom. And if you want some real hard-hitting music that expresses what's really on the minds of so many people in these times, then take a look at that. Okay. So I'm writing a new book at the moment as well. Yeah. I started that just this week, so I'm on sort of day 3 of getting that whole thing done. And the next book is going to be a novel.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's I wanted to try my hand at fiction because it will be the first piece of fiction that I've written. And it's a story that is set in Oxford in 1990, going into 1991, which is a very fascinating time. The story is personal in quite a few ways to me because 1990 is the year that I got my first sort of music industry break when I started working at a radio station in Oxford. So there's going to be a lot of period detail from the time. So 1990, you had the rave scene, you know, the dance music scene was in full flow. You had all these open air festivals and raves and stuff. So they're going to be making an appearance in the story, and it's going to bring in elements of my work in Musical Truth, talking about what these scenes may have really all been about and where all the drugs came from, the E, you know. There's going to be references to some of the political stuff that was happening. You had the poll tax riots that year. It was the last year of Thatcherism before she got kicked out in November of 1990. You had the first Gulf War that was launched by George Bush against Saddam Hussein. So all this stuff is going to appear in the narrative. And I'm just really looking forward to conveying some truths through that book. So it's not going to be just straight fiction for the sake of it. It's going to be a vehicle to get forward some spiritual truths and some empowering information in terms of the way the story pans out. So it's a very different thing for me to do. And I'm on day 3 of writing it, but I'm really enjoying it so far. I hope to get that out by the end of the year. It's probably going to be published early 2020, which will be the 30th anniversary of all of that.
Fantastic. And what I'll do is I'll put all the links that you've mentioned in the podcast. So when you scroll down, you can click on all the links and they'll go through to everything you've mentioned. And I'd love to do another interview about your book and some of the subjects in the book you're writing at the moment at some point when you've got time. Thank you, Mark, for giving me the opportunity to chat to you because I know you're a busy man, and I love to keep sharing some information back and forth as well because
Sure.
It's great to keep that conversation going, and I know as an independent filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and podcaster, that how hard it is to do this and juggle a family and juggle a day job and keep going. And people like us and other people like David Icke and Gareth Icke, who I speak to quite regularly, and these guys, Neil Sanders is another great one.
Yep.
Are the ones that are making the difference slowly but surely, and I appreciate your time, so thank you, mate.
No worries, man, and thank you for getting me on, and thank you for your work as well. You're making a very valuable contribution. It's a collective effort, like you say. You know, a phrase I used to use at the end of my talks was, one person can't change the world, but they can be an essential component in the process that does. So we've just all got to keep doing our thing and stay on the same page and keep the same goals in mind, which is the liberation and upliftment of humanity and the breaking away from this control system that's had us in its grip for far too long. And we all play our part in that. So well done for what you do as well. And
thank you, mate.
Keep on.
And support each other. Stop fighting. Don't argue about the details, who's right, who's wrong. Just support each other and be on each other's shows, share information, and we all want the same thing.
Stupid fucking infighting just does my head in.
We all want the same thing at the end of the day, and we're supposed to anyway. So I don't want to be right. I just want to feel safe, and that's it. So thank you, mate, and I appreciate your time.
No worries. All the best to you.
Cheers, mate. You take care of yourself. Bye bye.